security, income generation, employment, health and nutritional statuses, and environmental sustainability. As the majority of populations are projected to live in the cities by 2030, urban agriculture is receiving a lot more attention. However, in many places, such as Pikine, a city in the Dakar region of Senegal, or even here in Berkeley and Oakland, a lot of urban farmers are struggling to find the economic support and land they need to continue or expand their production. Over the summer, I traveled to Senegal for 2 months to explore urban agriculture in a different context and setting than what I interacted here in the Bay Area. Pikine is the second largest city in Senegal, and it's home to 1,500 market-oriented farmers. These farmers do a range of agricultural productivity because they're in the Nayades region, which is known for its prime animal and plant production conditions because it has really fertile soils and they do have a rainy season. Most of the farmers who own the land own it through inheritance. For instance, the man in the picture, his land was passed down through his grandfather to him. Many families have become proprietors and now rent or sell their land to people to farm, but it's still from that line of inheritance. Nearly all of the farmers are men, but women do hold important roles as banabanas, or people who buy produce and do the harvest, then bring it to local markets and sell it for a profit of their own. Bastian, who is the man you see in the picture, is an urban farmer and is also Secretary General of Provania. Provania is a small farmers organization. There's about 150 farmers in it, and it's a collective group, and they kind of come together so that they can support each other, they can share resources, and their board acts as a representative to deal with higher institutions. Pop was my main contact for my project, and he introduced me to a lot of farmers who I worked with, which included interviews, observations, and building compost projects with them. But as I was asking them why don't they do compost, why is it hard for them, what do they need, and why don't they have it, my research kind of changed directions and developed to focus more on policies and government support. So I also conducted interviews with members of the Ministries of Environment, Agriculture, and Horticulture, ministries being government institutions of Senegal. I have come to identify 2 umbrella themes that are limiting urban agriculture and farmers from improving their sustainability and productivity, and also providing challenges for them to even maintain their level of productivity right now. These being power and political dynamics and ideology of modernity. Throughout my research, I was shocked by how many different groups and institutions exist and are involved with urban agriculture. At one point, I was really impressed by how many organizations were involved, but with time, I find myself a little bit lost and confused amongst them all, a feeling felt by all parties, as communication and collaboration between them are all very low and inconsistent. Both Provania and the ministries each have a large number of partners, whether that be international, state, NGOs, private, and they usually have them for financial or technical support. Depending on the department, these partners either have a lot of power regarding the projects or are simply money sources. Specifically within the Ministry of Agriculture, these mostly international partners basically run the show, as they have power to make changes to the projects, the realization of the projects, they have access to the evaluations and what they're going to do with it. This leads to problems of conflicting interests, as most often it comes down to a question of developing agriculture or helping farmers and food security in Senegal. Further, this kind of relationship with foreign investors allows a lot of foreign influence on agricultural policies, which doesn't necessarily look out for the livelihood of Senegalese farmers or even the Senegalese economy, but rather for some of these international folks' economies, such as the Netherlands' high demand for mangoes. Even more problematic, in my opinion, is that farmers are not involved with the decision-making processes of projects in the ministries. Farmers interviewed expressed that they received no help from the government. Even after writing them, they didn't get responses. They wish that the government would come see their land, talk to them. They hope to get incorporated into the conversation of policies or projects, but they seem defeated and disillusioned by the idea that the government would even be willing to help them. They feel as though the government doesn't even think of them. In contrast, one of the women at the Ministry of Horticulture that I spoke with said that they regularly visit farming areas around Senegal, including Pikine, and that they were the #1 supporters of the farmers as they provide them with seeds and fertilizers. When I asked who she visited and who she gave the resources to, she replied with GIE. GIE is a larger group in Pikine aimed to economically support the farmers, and they do work with Provania, which is a small farmer organization. However, somewhere along the line, that support that the state gave to GIE didn't reach the farmers at Provania. So this could be because the state isn't giving as much as they write off, or there's some sort of gap with GIE distributing it. I was not able to follow this path during my time frame in Senegal, and I think this falls under a greater general problem of overall miscommunication and having too many groups and subdivisions that aren't in sync with one another. On a local government level, the farmers again expressed that they received nothing from municipal institutions, and were actually threatened by them because people wanted to take their land to develop buildings and homes. It is through the farmers' international partners who have more money and investments and therefore more weight with city officials who were able to talk to them to persuade the city to keep their land for the farmers. This type of telephone relationship is not only confusing, but creates more opportunities for miscommunications and issues. Urban agriculture had historically been a major activity in pre-colonial African cities. The hot and humid climate made it difficult to store and transport fresh foods, making urban ag a necessity. Our earliest French records of urbanization and city building and colonial administration propagated negative and even hostile attitudes towards urban agriculture, writing them off as backwards, dirty, and bush-like, and therefore not civilized. Further, they said that urban agriculture compromised health and distracted natives from formal work, and therefore was forbidden within the city. Although African countries now have their independence, these ingrained concepts still affect contemporary urban planning. The current ideology of development, or modernity, or standards of a civilized city, embodies discourses of development via industrialization, urbanization, and technological advancement. From this concept, we have seen the importance of formal higher education on social statuses, especially those with a scientific or business focus. These people are often seen as more intelligent and more valuable to society. Unfortunately, growing food, though completely necessary for society to survive, does not fall within the category of modern development and is rather seen as a traditional job. As a result, farmers don't receive the credit or respect and are often left out of conversations with city officials or scientific experts. Although all ministry members that I talked with are genuinely concerned for the farmers and they are totally dedicated to serving their country and helping their people, the farmers are belittled by them as simply beneficiaries. One director from the Ministry of Horticulture advised me to go to them directly next time as their student to learn about urban agriculture, because going to the farmers would be a waste of my time, as the farmers knew nothing themselves. The farmers didn't know the statistics of how many kilos of lettuce they grew. The farmers didn't know the policies, and not all of the farmers even know how to speak French. How easily she spoke of the farmers in a defensive tone showed me how little respect they received and how low they were on the social ladder. As of right now, the land is not being used sustainably or to its full potential because farmers are limited by numerous complex situations that intersect with other sectors of society, but affect vital parts of their farm, such as land, water, organic material, and labor. Farmers always list needing financial support. But I feel like if they get basic resources such as these, they wouldn't have to be so dependent on money from their partners. In my ideal world, city planning and managing would include urban ag, and it would occur through an integrated process involving all sectors of ministries involved, all populations relevant, such as the farmers, restaurant workers, food sector, citizens, so that they could create really symbiotic, well-rounded, sophisticated answers. However, until we reach utopia, there are many directions and paths to follow. My work has barely begun and is far from finished, but some leads I intend to follow include continuing the path of becoming more familiar with institutions, how they work, who they work with, and the whys. We should continue to look for means of better communication between institutions and farmers to be able to come up with more well-rounded and sophisticated solutions to the issues at hand. And I feel we need a reparation of the reputation of farmers as respectable and important. And that's essential to incorporating them and moving forward to a food system that is economically, environmentally, and socially viable. Thank you.
Do you think that the term urban agriculture is sort of part of a larger rebranding of farming as like a modern, respectable endeavor? Do you see any evidence to suggest that, perhaps in the United States or not?
Yeah, so I actually took this out of my talk. It's interesting to see urban agriculture in different parts of the world. Here in the Bay Area, it's very much a social movement enabled by middle to upper class who are working to fight food justice or alleviate food deserts. So it is having that more new age, hipster support here in the Bay Area, especially as like the green movement. In Dakar specifically, it's different. It's very much market-oriented farmers. These folks are like doing it for their living, and it's not necessarily just to fight for a social movement, but it's fighting for their living. And so it is kind of different. Urban ag there doesn't have the same weight or title or even the same atmosphere when you say it. It is more a market-oriented job. But
is there a word? I mean, like, does the French phrase exist? I mean, like, do people use the term urban agriculture?
yeah, agriculture urban. It's backwards, but.
I was hoping you could speak more on this conflict between developers and farmers.
Yeah. So that's also something I wish I could dive into more. It's funny because at the same time I was working with farmers, one of the brothers of the family I was staying with ran for a mayoral position. So I was working with farmers in days, and then I had dinner and watching TV with people they're saying aren't talking to them. So it was interesting to have those two sides. Basically, from the farmer's perspective, municipal institutions only see them during campaigns and only talk about it during campaigns. But once they get elected, there's nothing really done. From the other's perspective, I don't know too much in detail, but they are very focused on developing homes and buildings. So right now, urbanization there is still going very much in the direction as it has all over the world, where it's very much a city area with buildings and homes, and then a farming section would be out in rural. And right now, there's still very much a lot of opportunity in Dakar for those two things to be integrated, because this land has been there and it still is there. It's just constantly threatened. And multiple farmers I talked to, I'm like, what do you want? Like, what do you need to be comfortable, to be like sustainable? And they're like, I just want to not worry about my land. Like, I just want to keep my land. So right now, it's the idea of like building homes versus integrating that space of gardens into what is a city.
what a task. For awesome papers, I learned a lot from each one of them. I have to admit that the paper on Japan will be my most challenging one because I have not done any work on Japan. My main work has been Middle East, North Africa, so I'm familiar with those issues. But to raise some questions about Catholicism in Japan and whether there's a distinction between indigenous religious practices, Shinto versus Catholicism. Is Catholicism seen as a new outsider religion versus the practices that emerges from the long history of Shinto practices in Japan? Also, maybe a historical development post-Second World War to show how religion been situated in the Japanese society and how those practices emerging after the Second World War impacted the religious practices and the institution of religion. In addition, the secularization has been taking place across many parts of the world, but also there are regions where there are actually greater adherence to religion and possibly also moving to the right in relation to religious practices. So what are the factors that are leading some areas, Japan would be one of them, in terms of secularization and how we could measure this in general. An additional question, and I know I'm raising these questions, you're not going to try to go and answer, but those are some things that I was looking at. Definitely the practice, religious practice in relation to Catholicism differs from one area to the other. And therefore, as we're seeing in Japan, in terms of how the practices, in particular, the gatherings are speaking about certain things. In your paper, you mentioned they were discussing the World Cup. I think if you were in Latin America, the World Cup will be religion and then Catholicism. Second, you would not be expected to be in Brazil and focus on Sunday, knowing that Brazil lost to Germany 7-1. That's actually a major crisis. It's hell for Brazil. But in general, Catholicism took on a particular flavor in each area. So is there developments in Japan in that way? So those are just some of the issues and items that came out of your paper. Now, Kelly, welcome back. And your Arabic is improving tremendously because I had Kelly in my Arabic language class. Now, the blog that you, or the two blogs, one is an actual magazine in the form of blog, and the other is a blog. Writing in English, and I think you mentioned this in comparison to the Palestinian. Does that places the writing within the framework of the Jordanian society and culture, or is it seen as an externality? And in the sense in here, it creates that who is the audience for the writing? At least the majority in Jordan, while they do take English in school, but basically it's English to be able to function at a rudimentary level, which means that the quality of what's being written is almost directed at a conversation that is outside versus internally, and that's a question in terms of how viable it is to have a conversation about LGBT within Jordanian framework while the conversation is taking place in English. I think in Palestine they're a little bit more speaking the language of the people because they also are engaged in what they consider to be a liberation struggle vis-a-vis the occupation. So that's an important aspect of it. So the local sexual cultural framing is an important one. Now, I don't know if you got into some of this discussion with some of your interviews, the implication of seeing LGBT as part of westernization and the challenges from at least the religious institutions and the religious movements in the country, which is on the rise, and whether they're being attacked from that point of view or not. Now, you mentioned that the Quran actually mentions about the use of the term Lut. And this is actually often the argument that since the Quran does mention a punishment, it just proves that there are homosexuals in the society. Because you would not pass a law without actually existing practices that are there. So how the historical development or historical treatment of not public presence of homosexuality, but in the private sphere. And I think that's part of the conversation in general. In addition, how link these movements in terms of LGBT to the broader political movements? Were they part of, let's say, the Arab Spring, the protests? Do they take a visible presence? Or is it only in terms of blog? So that's an important indicator that they were able to reach beyond the boundaries of an audience that is external. Omar's paper, you mentioned about the 3,000 military orders, but the questions about the 4 Geneva Convention as an international document. Does the 4 Geneva Convention has any power at this time, considering all the violations that has taken place in the occupied territories? But I also think about the U.S. violation of the 4 Geneva Convention, considering that we have a professor of law in here, not a critique, but John Yu, who already said that the 4 Geneva Convention is in the garbage can. And for a period of almost 8 years, we were violating the 4 Geneva Convention in terms of torture, rendition, moderate physical pressure, what was it? The standard if organ failure does not occur, therefore it's not torture, which included waterboarding. So how viable the 4 Geneva Convention can be at a time where violations have taken place, including in our own country, here in the United States. And also mentioned, the question was raised about whether the UN has any power. The US is sitting on the Security Council. Soviet Union is sitting on the Security Council. China is sitting on the Security Council. And I think between the three of them, I think they win the World Cup in any competition relative to the exercise of international law. So this is just to frame it in a larger conversation about the 4 Geneva Convention. I'm an advocate of the 4 Geneva Convention, but just to understand that what is the enforceability of the law if those who are guarding the law are basically their primary violators and also the major supporters of countries that engage in such violations. Who determines the correct interpretations of the 4 Geneva Convention? And also, who determines whether an area is occupied or not? Israel asserts that it's not an occupying power. It does define the occupied territories as disputed territories. So does Israel have the ability unilaterally to say we're not occupying and therefore we're there by right? And if that's the case, what happens with 2.5 to 3 million individuals that happen to say that we are occupied? So what would be the determining factor? I think you would refer to the United Nations is a major institution, as well as the International Court of Justice have ruled on the case in relations to the wall, and as well as the International Criminal Court, which the Palestinians are about to enter into a membership in it. So that still is an area of fluidity that we need to look at. Aja's paper, Urban Farming. I know that in Berkeley and in Oakland we love this, but much of Africa and the world have been doing urban farming for a long period of time. Colonization said, no, you're not developed. Therefore, the only way for us to actually engage in development is that you have to have a steel mill, and with steel mill you have to develop into a form of industrialization, and then you have to work on processing products for advanced markets, so we become the literally advanced factory for much of the advanced market overseas, and therefore now we're going into another circle where we're saying to Africa and parts of Latin America and other places that, oh no, you need to go back to urban farming because it became the mode of development. So the question I raise, how effective it is for the NGOs, and I use a new term, the NGOs, which is the non-profit industrial complex, because when we come and arrive on the scene, we already come with a particular worldview developed here on the Northern Hemisphere, and we assume, and I don't think that you're saying this, but we assume that they don't know anything, and we need to show them now. So that steel mill have transformed itself now to a particular mode of development. So that question is important. We mentioned about the state, which is a post-colonial state, and we have to assume there is a high level of corruption, high level of nepotism, high level of also incentivization to maintain the particular post-colonial economy intact. So it's not a matter of lack of communication, but a lack of basic ability or acceptance that there has to be a transformation not only of urban farming, but education, economic infrastructure, and the whole framing within the society. So the problem is a much deeper problem, and I think we have to begin to think in those terms. You highlighted the two major areas, which I agree with you, power and political dynamics and ideology of modernity. And we take it for granted, modernity and its impact. Modernity has been a very profound disorienting process that continues to unfold on a daily basis, and until we take stock of it, especially in many parts of the southern hemisphere, we still are still in the early stages of development. On a yearly basis, the southern hemisphere still subsidizes the northern hemisphere. I know we speak of trickle-down economics, trickling down from the south to the north. And as such, we need to begin to really discuss how is that mechanism taking place, and part of these mechanisms are vested in the structures of industrialization, modernity, post-coloniality, and I think there's an opportunity for us to correct those mechanisms, but it's going to be hard work to do. So thank you for listening.
I thank you. I hope you continue to participate the next season.
Next